Good afternoon, I'm Mike Amor. It's 4 o'clock in Melbourne and these are our top stories. 176 new cases, worries over a new cluster at St Kilda Road as outbreaks grow across the north and west. Plus, major changes to the vaccine rollout. AstraZeneca doses now 6 weeks apart. As the elderly are warned, get the jab or go to the back of the queue. Businesses brace for 2 more months in lockdown. How long will they survive? Hear their heartbreaking stories. And our hospitals switch to pandemic mode. ICU wards put on alert as they prepare for a wave of infected patients.
Live from Melbourne, this is 7's Afternoon News with Mike Amor.
First at 4, more worrying signs our Delta outbreak is spreading further and faster than health authorities can handle. There were 176 new cases today. Worse still, more than half are mystery infections. The outbreak continues to rage in north and western suburbs, but is also now being detected in the southeast, including Toorak and Paran. In a desperate bid to speed up our all-important vaccination rate, today the interval between AstraZeneca doses was halved from 12 to 6 weeks. State political reporter Charnel Vella joins us now. And Charnel, today marks a shift for Victorian authorities, now focused on vaccinating our way out of lockdown.
Well, the focus has absolutely changed. It's still on driving case numbers down, but we shouldn't be fixated on the daily case numbers. Instead, the big focus is the race to vaccinate, and to push that along, approval has been granted to half the wait time between AstraZeneca doses. That means anyone at home right now who has reached the 6-week mark, they can go back to their doctor and get the second jab, or they can visit a state hub.
In the current situation, with community transmission established, the benefit is to get vaccinated after the 6-week mark and not to delay until 12 weeks. Getting that second dose, it protects you from symptomatic infection, lifts the protection from around 30% to around 70%.
The advice from our Deputy Chief Health Officer is that the vaccination rate is having an impact on our current outbreak. Authorities, however, are still worried about the north and west, given how fast it's spreading in those areas. And in a sign of what's to come, QR codes are already going up around playgrounds, Mike, and as spring begins, plenty of Victorians are out enjoying the warm weather. Health authorities are pleading with people to remember that restrictions remain in place as we race towards that target of 70% first dose vaccinations.
Charnel Vella with the latest, thank you. There are new Tier 1 exposure alerts. The site's base backpackers at St Kilda over 5 days, Cassar Suites Coolaroo over 4 days, Serco Essendon Fields earlier this week, Broadmeadows Family Healthcare on the 24th of August. And in developing news, Tier 1 sites have just been updated. It now includes Northern General Bodyworks in Bundoora last Friday and a Richmond residential complex on Elizabeth Street over the past 4 days. Melbourneian businesses are being warned to brace for at least 2 more months in lockdown, but many fear they won't be able to hang on until then. As Cameron Bowe reports, they're calling for a roadmap heading into Christmas.
For many Victorians, this is the most difficult time of the pandemic. They've managed to endure it so far, but they are crying out for some hope on the horizon. The pain is particularly acute for our small business operators. They're still in limbo. No clarity on when they'll be able to reopen or increase the level of their trading. Some of them have been left disheartened by the switch away from the target of 0 COVID cases. That's left them to question why they've made the sacrifices that they have made over the past 19 months.
It was like I got another stab in the heart. That's the truth of it. And I was just like, what can I do? What can I do now?
I'm worried that we're going to lose all the Christmas functions like we did last year, and then we'll miss half of summer again, and then the business stops becoming viable, and then we have to think seriously about getting out of it, because I'm not doing another winter like this.
Our artists and our farmers have also been left in the dark in terms of getting back to what they love and in the manner that they want to do it. The deadline for applications for many state government grants are due this week. It is understood that the state government's in the process of finalising details on updated financial assistance.
The Royal Melbourne is the first Victorian hospital to be placed on pandemic mode, preparing for an influx of COVID cases. It means there is now a special isolated area within the ICU where currently 11 patients are being treated. The head of the unit told Nick McCallan they're bracing for many more in coming weeks.
We've activated what we call pandemic mode in our intensive care unit in preparation for an expected increase in number of cases. That just really means we've got a dedicated negative pressure facility to help with infection control and contain the virus to an area within the intensive care unit. It allows us to care for 20 patients at any one time, and as of today we have 11 patients in that unit.
And why did you need to activate it now?
We always know that when community cases rise, we will expect to see an increased hospital load, usually about a week to 10 days after the community cases. So seeing what's happening in Victoria at the moment, we thought it was prudent to do this planning. Right at this present time, we have 7 patients on a ventilator, and that means that they're on life support, they're critically ill, they have a breathing tube in their mouth, they're on an induced coma, while we look after their breathing to allow some time for their lungs to recover so they can adequately breathe on their own.
How difficult is it for your staff to treat those people?
It's very draining wearing all the PPE for staff who are in that zone and need to have breaks sort of every 4 hours because they can't eat, go to the bathroom or drink while they're in the PPE. So it is draining on the staff for that aspect.
Some experts say in the weeks ahead we could get up to 2,000 cases a day. Will our hospitals be able to cope with that?
My expectation is we will. It will require a whole of state response, great partnerships between all the public hospitals, private facilities. There may be some impacts on elective surgery, but I'm confident we have enough resources to deal with the situation.
Australia's top doctor has refuted claims from the Queensland Premier that lifting her state's borders would put the lives of children in danger from the Delta strain. Anastasia Palaszczuk says she wants more information before she's willing to commit to the national reopening plan. Rob Scott reports.
Chief Medical Officer Professor Paul Kelly says while children under 12 do catch and transmit the virus, they're not as badly affected as adults. But Anastasia Palaszczuk is demanding the 70 and 80% vaccination modelling the national reopening plan is based on be reworked to include young children who are unable to be vaccinated, declaring she wants more information on how the Delta strain would impact them before she's willing to bring Queensland's border down.
This is a serious issue that needs a serious discussion, Mr. Speaker. These are questions that I want answers to. These are questions that Queenslanders want answers to.
Professor Kelly says vaccines have not been approved for use in children anywhere in the world, and the best way to protect them is to make sure everyone else gets the jab to limit the spread.
Children in general do not get severe illness. There have only been 3 children under the age of 12 that have been admitted to intensive care. 3 out of 3,815. That is way less than 1 in 1,000.
While that debate intensifies, the focus on those who can get a jab continues. The Prime Minister will send a letter to the almost 600,000 Australians aged between 60 and 69 who have still not been vaccinated, urging them not to wait for Pfizer and to get a shot of AstraZeneca as soon as possible, warning they have a greatly increased risk from the virus. A risk which will only grow once the country does eventually open up.
There's 1,288 new cases in New South Wales and 7 COVID patients have died. The state has just reached its 70% first dose target, meaning all exercise limits have now been scrapped. They're on track to reach 70% double doses and open up more in October, but their Premier warns there'll be higher case numbers and hospitalisations when that happens.
It's really important to note that I've been commenting in the last few days that we anticipate October will be the worst month for the number of people that lose their lives and also for the rate of people in hospital. And if I can just briefly explain that it's normally in the second week of illness that people get very sick. So there's always a lag between when people get diagnosed and when they're likely to need intensive care or hospitalisation.
There's 12 new cases in Canberra today. Western Australia has just made it harder for Victorians to enter the state. Tougher restrictions come into force on Monday when Victoria will be reclassified as high risk.
Proof of a negative COVID-19 PCR test in the 72 hours prior to departure. Proof of receipt of at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine for those who are eligible to receive it.
Travellers must also get an approved pass and quarantine for 14 days. Up next, Victoria becomes the first Australian state to ban Nazi symbols. Plus, the Taliban parade US weaponry and Black Hawks as hundreds try to flee Afghanistan. And new insight into the long-term impacts of COVID on kids. Back soon across Victoria and Tasmania. Live from Melbourne, you're watching 7's Afternoon News. A glorious 26 degrees outside right now. Jane Bunn will be here with the forecast later in the hour. Victoria is set to become the first state in Australia to make it illegal to display Nazi symbols like the swastika. The new laws are expected to be introduced next year to stamp out hateful behaviour in the community. Anti-vilification protections will also be strengthened to cover sex, gender and disabilities. The Taliban have held a parade through the Afghanistan city of Kandahar, proudly showing equipment left to Afghan forces by the US. There are growing fears over food shortages as many people continue their attempts to flee. David Woywood has more.
Well, America might be gone, but the celebrations are still far from over on the streets of Afghanistan. A military parade proudly displaying the incoming government's newfound weaponry, heavily armoured vehicles in formation and adorned with Taliban flags. An aerial display too, this Black Hawk helicopter in the hall left by fleeing US troops.
Did you see anyone else like blinking?
Still the president ducking questions on the nature of America's departure, shifting focus today, leaving explanations to his defence chiefs who say they're wary about cooperating with Afghanistan's incoming rulers.
This is a ruthless group from the past, and whether or not they change remains to be seen.
But with hundreds of US citizens remaining, cooperation will be needed. The White House says it's committed to further evacuations, including for the Afghan translator who helped rescue then Senator Biden when he was trapped in Taliban territory on a trip years ago, and the Afghanistan women's soccer team. Some were evacuated to Australia last week, but for others, an international hunt is now on to find them before the war-torn country's new administration does. Others not in hiding, just desperate to leave. This border crossing with Pakistan swelling with crowds desperate not to take their chances under Afghanistan's new rulers.
There's new insight into how COVID is impacting children long term. Results of the world's biggest study into long COVID in kids has revealed just 14% reported having symptoms 15 weeks later.
Some people were saying that as many as 50% of children would be affected with long COVID who had the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So I think we're very firmly able to say it's nothing like that higher number.
The children will be monitored for 2 years. Sport is up next, including a massive shake-up in the coaching ranks. Also, all the build-up to tomorrow night's blockbuster final between the Cats and the Giants. And see a paddleboarder's close encounter with a whale. Stay with us right here at 7. Sport now with Andrew McCormack and Macca, a massive development in the coaching ranks.
There has been, Mike. In breaking news this afternoon, Ross Lyon has pulled out of the Carlton coaching race. The former Fremantle and St Kilda coach contacted Blues president Luke Sayers earlier today, saying he didn't want to submit to the process, which is believed could take up to 45 days. We'll have more on this developing story at 6 o'clock tonight. Still on footy, in Geelong coach Chris Scott isn't concerned with his side's early finals form. The Cats had a run on Optus Stadium today ahead of tomorrow night's semi-final clash with the Giants. And while their record in week one of the finals has been far from ideal, they've been able to bounce back in 3 of the past 5 years.
It's not really all that productive for us to cherry pick the good parts of the past and ignore the bad bits. I think a much better policy is to focus on the here and now and just get the next little bit right.
Giants coach Leon Cameron says he'll address Toby Green's umpire bump with him after the season. He doesn't want to distract from the Giants' clash against the Cats tomorrow night.
We're disappointed in Toby putting himself in those positions. If you stray too far to the right and worrying about things that you can't control, then clearly you take your eye off the ball, and we've got a massive challenge on Friday night.
Cameron suggesting Stephen Cornelio, Tim Taranto or Bobby Hill as possible replacement for Green's role up forward. Luke Beveridge has confirmed 2 Bulldog stars won't return this weekend. The Dogs coach says youngster Jamara Ugle-Hagan doesn't suit the current mix in the forward line, while ruckman Stephen Martin still isn't fit as he recovers from an ongoing groin issue.
It just puts too much pressure on us and our team, because to backfill that ruck situation in game, it's just too disruptive.
The Dogs will fly to Brisbane in the morning, and they are able to have a run on the Gabba in the afternoon. And torrential rain and even a tornado warning has caused havoc at the US Open. Play was suspended on the outside courts, and not even the roof on Louis Armstrong Stadium could stop the rain from pouring in. Not quite Rod Laver Arena, but before the heavens opened, Aussie Alexei Popyrin overcame a frustrated Grigor Dimitrov to move through to the third round. Well done, Alexei. He's a rising star in the Aussie tennis world. But Ross Lyon out of the coaching race. He was an unbackable favourite, and now the Blues back to square one. So we'll have all on the fallout of that big news coming up.
Yeah, fascinating, certainly for Blues fans. Thanks, Macca. One lucky woman has had a close encounter with a whale in the Patagonia region of Argentina. The southern right whale playfully swam underneath the woman's paddleboard. Tourism operators say there have been at least 1,500 of the mammals migrating past Argentina this year, but still, it's an encounter like this is 1 in a million. There's 176 new COVID cases today, with 3/4 of infections across the north and west of Melbourne. But there's also new alerts in the southeast, with a worrying new cluster emerging. The details are just ahead. Plus, the big shake-up to the vaccine rollout. AstraZeneca jabs now 6 weeks apart. Hear from the owners of a hair salon that spent more time locked down than open. And New South Wales winds back restrictions as they record more than 1,200 new cases. We're back in just a couple of minutes.
Live from Melbourne, this is 7's Afternoon News with Mike Amor.
There are major changes to the vaccine rollout, with the time between AstraZeneca jabs now reduced from 12 to 6 weeks in Victoria. This applies to state vaccine clinics. Anyone who had their first jab at a GP is able to book in at a hub for their second. It comes as Victoria recorded 176 new cases, with 3/4 of today's infections across the west and north. There's growing concern about a cluster linked to a call centre on St Kilda Road, with the outbreak growing to 17. As Melina Saris reports, today's daily infections are the highest they've had in more than a year, but authorities are now focused on vaccinating our way out of lockdown.
Good afternoon. Victoria has recorded 176 new COVID cases today. So far, our contact tracers have managed to link 83 of those to existing outbreaks, but that means that there are 93 mystery cases that have been out in the community. It brings the total number of active cases in Victoria to 1,029. Victoria will now vaccinate its way out of lockdown, aiming for New South Wales-style vaccine targets. Almost 34,000 doses were given in the past 24 hours.
Delta has changed the script.
Today I can also announce that the dosage interval, so the spacing between the first and the second dose of AstraZeneca vaccine in Victoria, will be revised down from 12 weeks to 6 weeks in all of our state-run services.
The state's lockdown has been extended until at least September 23, when it's expected that 70% of residents have had a first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. When we reach that milestone, the 5-kilometre travel limit will expand to 10 Ks, and the daily exercise cap will increase from 2 hours to 3 hours. It's hoped that lockdown in regional Victoria, excluding the Shepparton areas, will be able to end next week and open up with restrictions still in in place. Melbourne will be in some form of lockdown until 70% of Victorians have received 2 doses of the vaccine, which is in around 2 months' time. That's to prevent our health system from being overwhelmed. As our case numbers rise, our major hospitals are preparing for an influx of COVID patients as we shift to this next phase of the pandemic.
OK, let's cross live now to Professor Nancy Baxter, head of the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health. Nancy, thanks for your time. A lot of us obviously are taking this extended lockdown very hard, but given the jump in cases today, is it justified?
Yeah, well, I'm feeling the lockdown too. I moved to Melbourne in February of 2020, so it's been an interesting time here. I've spent a lot of time in my house alone. But I think the whole thing is with Delta, if we loosen restrictions too much now, when we're really kind of at a very steep upturn in terms of transmission, the chances of us getting not just to New South Wales level of COVID, but getting, to the tens of thousands of cases of COVID, that's a real chance, probably more likely than not if we open up widely. So I think that we are going to be in some pretty severe restrictions until we vaccinate our way out. I think they will try to find things that they can give us that are lower risk, so outdoor activities and that type of thing. But I don't think we're going to see, a lot of, big changes to our lockdown, even though they're accepting that they're not going to get down to zero.
Nancy, we all know that Delta is more infectious, but this is a pretty hard lockdown. Why are our numbers going up, not down?
Well, it is really very much more effective. So it's at least twice as infectious as the initial form of COVID that we saw. But the thing that's really important is how fast it infects people. So, you can have contracted COVID-19 and given it to somebody within 24 hours, and they couldn't have passed it on. So there's very little time for contact tracers to get on top of that. Plus, you're able to transmit before you even have symptoms. So you can imagine how far behind the contact tracers are once they found a case. So it makes it very challenging to get control over. And then also, I think we've been very tired of lockdown. So I think we may not have been as compliant with the lockdown before. And this isn't casting any blame, but I think Delta looks for any possible gap and finds a way to infect people. And I think that that's part of what's happened as well.
We're now halving the gap between first and second AstraZeneca doses. What impact will that have on its efficacy?
Well, the initial trials of AstraZeneca kind of had mixed doses, not by design, but they had some people who had the dosages 4 weeks apart and some people who had longer intervals up to 12 weeks. And what they found was the immune response people had was great at the 12 weeks, but people it was still effective at 4 weeks between the doses. But the hypothesis was to have longer immunity if you have a longer interval. Right now, what we need is immunity this minute. So it makes sense to reduce the interval to six weeks because we know we get good immunity there. What we may not have is, immunity in 9 months, but in 9 months we'll have a lot more vaccines so people can get boosters. So I think it totally makes sense to get people protection now when they need it, and we'll worry about, the third dose of whatever vaccine they'll get, in 6 months or so when they may need it. So I think this is absolutely the right thing to do. And I really would encourage any of your listeners, if they're due for another dose of AstraZeneca, anywhere from next week to 5 more weeks, that now's the time to do it because there's lots of appointments and get yourself protected now is really important.
Well, Nancy, we're sorry to hear that you've spent more time locked down in Melbourne than free, but we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Business owners across Victoria are pleading for clarity about when they'll be able to reopen. Let's bring in Kylie and Paul from Styles and Glamour. They only opened the business 6 months ago. Thank you for joining us. I think you've been closed as much as you've been open. How did you react to yesterday's announcement?
Yesterday's was really tough. So we sat there waiting for the announcement to find out when the roadmap to retail was going to open, and just shattering again for all small businesses and retail to hear nothing.
This has been a long time in the planning, I take it. This is a dream of yours to open this business.
Yeah, it definitely has been. And it's been in the plans for roughly about a year.
Paul, how hard is
heart and soul into it.
Yeah, I was going to say, how hard is it to have this happen after so much planning?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. We spent so much time just planning and building the salon together, and we were so excited about it, and just we haven't even been able to experience being open for that long. So it's pretty disappointing because we can't see the full extent.
Has the government support been enough?
No, definitely not. We waited for months and months, about 5 months, 5.5 months after we opened to get anything. They still owe us over $5,000 that we're still waiting for.
Well, can you survive until we reach the government's vaccine targets, do you think?
No.
How much longer do you think?
I don't believe that any small business can.
How much longer do you think you could survive?
We're on the edge at the moment now. We've got to pay the rent for the shop and for the house and
loans for the business,
feed the kids, everything. It's we're definitely struggling.
Yeah, well, I can hear the kids in the background. I know it's been tough for you. We really appreciate your time and we wish you well. I know that everybody out there needs it. I just dyed my own wife's hair in the garage this week, so I hope you're back in business soon.
Thank you.
There's 1,288 new cases in New South Wales and 7 COVID patients have died. Sydney's Liverpool Hospital has revealed a shocking insight into the daily struggle on the COVID ward, releasing confronting vision of doctors and nurses caring for critically ill patients. Here's Amber Laidler.
Good afternoon. Yes, tragically another 7 lives lost to COVID-19 here in New South Wales, all men and women aged in their 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, and it takes the total death toll from this outbreak to 107. 1,288 new cases recorded in New South Wales today, but there was some good news. The state has now achieved 70% first dose vaccination coverage for the eligible population. More than 7 million doses of the vaccine have been administered in New South Wales. So there will be a very slight easing of restrictions for residents in those hotspot suburbs. They will now be granted unlimited exercise between the hours of 5 a.m. to 9 a.m, no longer just an hour. We are now well on our way to achieving 70% double dose coverage in mid-October, but the Premier has warned those freedoms will likely lead to higher case numbers and hospitalisations.
It's really important to note that I've been commenting in the last few days that we anticipate October will be the worst month for the number of people that lose their lives and also for the rate of people in hospital. And if I can just briefly explain that it's normally in the second week of illness that people get very sick. So there's always a lag between when people get diagnosed and when they're likely to need intensive care or hospitalisation.
Already hospitals are activating emergency plans to deal with the surge. Liverpool Hospital, which is right at the epicentre of this outbreak, has shared a heartbreaking video from inside their ICU ward. One of their respiratory specialists explaining that they're currently treating both vaccinated and unvaccinated patients, and the difference is like chalk and cheese, with the vaccinated patients simply not getting as sick. They are urging all people to come forward, roll up their sleeves and get vaccinated to avoid needing their care.
All the highlights from Tokyo are just ahead as canoe star and Army veteran Curtis McGrath begins his medal defence. Plus, Aussie Paralympic champions finally rewarded for winning medals. And baby joy as a rescue elephant gives birth to twins. We're back soon here on 7. To the Paralympics now, and Australian Army veteran Curtis McGrath has begun his campaign in Tokyo. The canoe star has a tough task ahead of him, defending his gold medal from the Rio Games. Joel Dry is there.
It's been a busy day for Curtis McGrath, the Paralympic superstar. Very well-known athlete. His story is also very well-known, a former Army combat engineer. This morning he started with the kayak and it was a little bit controversial. He was absolutely cruising in his race, out of the blocks really quickly, but then had an issue with his rudder and nearly steered out of his lane, which would have had him disqualified. And in having to quickly correct that, he lost some positions, so finished third. That means he will have to paddle in tomorrow's semi-final. No such drama in the VAR canoe. He was the winner of his heat, cruising in that one. So in that event, he goes straight through to the final.
The result I wanted, good race there. Really, like I said before, a really tough heat, almost finals-like. It's really great to be able to race internationally again.
Disappointment for our Aussie doubles pair in the quad wheelchair final last night. Heath Davison and Dylan Alcott going down to their Dutch opponents. Dylan will back up again in the singles. He's the reigning Paralympic champion in that event, so looking to add to our gold medal tally, which sadly we did not add to last night, but we do have plenty more opportunities to do that tonight, particularly in the pool where we are in 7 of the 8 finals. Will Martin in his 100 metres backstroke broke the world record in his heat, so he's looking really good, and Ben Hans in his 100 metres backstroke also broke the Paralympic record this morning. So plenty to look forward to. Our medal tally at the moment sits at 60, hoping to add to that in another action-packed night here at the Paralympics in Tokyo.
And for the first time, our Paralympians will receive a medal bonus, bringing them in line with our Olympic athletes. The federal government will provide additional funding to Paralympics Australia to correct the disparity.
I'm delighted we've been able to support our fantastic Paralympians in this way.
Both Olympians and Paralympians will now get a bonus of $20,000 for a gold medal. A Sri Lankan elephant orphanage is seeing double after one of its rescue elephants gave birth to twins. That's extremely rare for elephants in captivity. The 2 boys are the first twins born in the country in nearly 80 years. The tiny tots live at the Pinawala Elephant Orphanage, one of Sri Lanka's most popular tourist attractions. Up next, 7 people arrested over a murder investigation in Melbourne's north. Plus, a major win for Piers Morgan in his feud with the Duchess of Sussex. And what Victoria can learn from other countries now living with COVID. We're back soon here on 7. Seven people, including Hells Angels bikie gang members, have been arrested in early morning raids across Melbourne. They're being questioned over the suspicious disappearance of Adelaide man Kerry Giacomas.
We think that Kerry has got into a dispute with members, patch members of the Hells Angels outlaw motorcycle gang. For one reason or another, they've taken offence to that, and sadly, we believe that Kerry has been killed as a result of that.
He was last seen at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Thomastown in June. Victoria is now banking on vaccinating our way out of lockdown, abandoning the zero COVID goal. For a look at how it's working overseas, let's bring in Dr. Eric Feigelding, epidemiologist from the Federation of American Scientists in Washington, D.C. Doctor, I know it's late at night over there, so thank you for joining us. Can you take us what has worked and hasn't worked over there?
Well, thank you for having me. The first thing, of course, is vaccinations. But vaccinations, even at a very high level of above 50%, even 60, 70%, doesn't make a country impervious to case rises and surges. And we've seen that also in Israel, which is having record surges, a second consecutive day of record cases there. What is key is that you have to have mitigations on top of it. Obviously, lockdown is the most extreme, and no one really wants a lockdown. But in absence of that, you have to have other things. This multi-layer Swiss cheese strategy. And that includes not just masking, but premium masking if possible. KF94s, KN95, FFP2 masks, and large-scale mask mandates. And vaccine mandates or vaccine passport systems on top of these. Furthermore, for indoor environments, you really have to have ventilation and air disinfection because indoor air quality is so critical with an airborne virus such as the SARS coronavirus 2. And that includes either opening windows with very strong drafts to ensure minimum 6 exchanges per hour, or HEPA filters or upper room UV, things that can disinfect the air.
Eric, my wife is American and all her family can't believe that we're still in lockdown. How do people overseas view Australia's pandemic response, this zero COVID heavy lockdown response?
Well, I think Australia has taken the best approach so far this past year, and Australia has lived a normal life. But I think Delta has really changed things. It is really twice as contagious and is much more severe. The twice as contagious makes it much more difficult to control because the virus incubation time shrinks and it's 1,000 times higher viral load concentration. So I think zero COVID is still the best approach as long as the cases are low.
And we're seeing that wave of the unvaccinated in America right now. We're hoping to get to 70 to 80% to go back to life as normal. Is that realistic?
I think it's a little bit too presumptuous that once you're at 60, 70% vaccinated, everything will go back to normal. You have to do these additional mitigations. And that means we have to be at a new normal. And unless you face this reality of how contagious Delta is, Delta will continue to plow through our communities. And this is why I'm saying this is why Israel has changed rules that are starting October 1st. Unless you're triple vaxxed, you're not fully vaxxed. I hate to say it, but it is kind of needed given what we know about the penetrance and evasiveness of Delta.
Before I let you go, what's the end game here? It doesn't sound all that promising.
The end game is, I think this is the greatest current test of global solidarity to work together to ensure vaccinations for all. That clearly, unless we vaccinate the world, it will come to bite us. We're one world right now. We're connected within hours of each other from every point of the globe via air flights and other travel. And I think that reality is that unless we work together to vaccinate the world and not just be selfish and hoard vaccines, that we're going to be in this kind of like this rut for a while. And unless we accept that we have to do other things, unless someone is morally empty, like some global leaders are, we know who they are, that we cannot allow the virus to just burn through our population, which even then does not give you full protection for a long time, as we know. We have to literally reassess our entire environment of how do we allow us to live normal in a way that's protected.
Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, it's late there. I really appreciate your time.
Stay safe.
British broadcaster Piers Morgan has won a major battle in his feud with the Duchess of Sussex. The former talk show host has been cleared of any code violations by Britain's media regulator for his on-air comments about Meghan Markle following her interview with Oprah. Piers tweeted after the victory, questioning if he'll get his job back. Let's take a quick look at Melbourne's roads right now.
Good afternoon, I'm Jess Miller in the Space Talk traffic chopper. Heavy hold-ups on the Monash Freeway affecting the outbound journey. These delays kick in at around Warrigal Road and don't finish up until Wellington Road. This is due to works. We've also had word of some debris, a fallen road sign just near Huntingdale Road, but it seems that it's out of the way now because Citybound was looking pretty good. Save big with Space Talk's takeoff sale and score big on features like 4G phone and GPS locator in a kid's smartwatch. They're on sale now at spacetalkwatch.com. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.
On this warm and sunny day, let's check the weather with Jane Bunn. And Jane, I'm guessing it's not going to last.
Mike, there is still a bit more to come, then conditions rapidly go downhill tomorrow. The city has jumped all the way up to 26.6. That should set a new record for early season heat. And it's not just us. We're seeing new records across Victoria and Tasmania, as well as Hobart and Adelaide. It is sunny statewide. Winds are a strong and gusty northerly, raising dust in the northwest. 31.2 was the previous highest temperature set on the 20th of September. So all of these here have obliterated that today. Adelaide has hit 31. Even Hobart reached 26 as hot air from the interior is funneled down into the southeast. That's ahead of this strong cold front, and on the other side of that, we have had snow falling on the higher parts of southwestern WA. This brings a huge change in temperature. Today's yellows and reds out there, they're replaced by colder greens up to here tomorrow afternoon. Then it's chilly green and blue for the weekend. Winds may be strong enough to do damage about these areas tonight and tomorrow until the cold front passes through. In Melbourne, the winds won't fully ease until lunchtime tomorrow. Here it is, starting in the far west in the early hours of the morning. There's patches of light rain ahead of the main band, and that is heavy along there with the risk of thunderstorms, widespread falls of 10 to 30 millimetres. If you get a thunderstorm, it could bring up to 60 millimetres. Melbourne is wettest on Friday afternoon and evening. Now, with that, all these eastern catchments are on flood watch for minor to moderate flooding. For Melbourne, this does include Dandenong Creek and the Yarra. Around the nation tomorrow, that rain band stretches right on up. We've got early rain in Adelaide, rain all day in Hobart, but it doesn't reach Canberra or Sydney until Saturday. To Victoria, widespread rain. It extends eastwards during the day. When that hits, the temperature plummets, but the wind eases back. At the start of the rain, there may be thunderstorms in there, and they could bring heavy falls. It reaches the far east of the state later on as it clears the west. So in Melbourne, we remain warm all through the night and in the morning until lunchtime. And then it rapidly drops down into the low teens. Be prepared for that tomorrow. There is rain in the afternoon and evening. We do have the chance of a heavy thunderstorm in there as well. So a big day of weather is due tomorrow morning.
Oh dear, no kidding. Thanks, Jane. And that's all from the 7 Newsroom for now. Peter Mitchell's here at 6 from the 7 News team. Have a great afternoon.